Books presents an unabridged recording of War, Terrible War, 1855 to 1865. Book 6 of A History of Us by Joy Hakim. Narrated by Christina Moore.
Preface 1. Dinner at Brown's Hotel. A preface is an explanation that comes before a book gets started and tells what it is about. This book is about war, civil war, which is war inside a nation, and that takes some powerful explaining. Our Civil War takes so much explaining that this book needs 2 prefaces. The time, April 13th, 1830. The place, Brown's Indian Queen Hotel, Washington, D.C. The occasion, a dinner to celebrate Thomas Jefferson's birthday. Jefferson had been dead 4 years, but politicians like dinners and celebrations. The main characters, Vice President John C. Calhoun and President Andrew Jackson. The nation was in trouble. Only a few people could see that, but President Andrew Jackson was one of those who was alarmed. The country, which he and everyone else called the Union or the Federal Union, was being divided in half, right along its beltline. It was being divided into North and South, and those terms had to do with much more than geography. People in the North and South were beginning to dislike each other, and say so with angry words. There was that old problem of what Southerners called their peculiar institution, and others called slavery. Slavery was making people in the North and South think and act differently from each other. There were other problems. The old Southern states, like South Carolina, were having economic troubles. Their land was worn out. South Carolina blamed the North and some of Congress's laws for its problems. John Calhoun, South Carolina's handsome but unsmiling political leader, said each state had the right to decide if Congress's laws were constitutional or not. That meant each state could decide which laws to obey and which not. You can see that the nation wouldn't last long if each state made its own rules. South Carolina was used to having its way. It was the state that 43 years earlier had insisted that slavery be allowed in the new nation's constitution. Now it was insisting on what were called states' rights, and that was what most of the toasts were about at that dinner at Brown's Indian Queen Hotel. There were 24 toasts that evening before they got to Andrew Jackson. People could see that he was fuming over the ideas being toasted. The president rose to his feet, and so did everyone else. Martin Van Buren, who was soon to be president, climbed on a chair so he could see. Then the man they called Old Hickory raised his glass high above his silver hair, glared at John Calhoun, and said, "Our Union, it must be preserved." They say that Calhoun's hand shook, and some said wine trickled down his arm, but he was undaunted. He gave his toast. "The Union, next to our liberty, most dear." What happened next? People in the North heard Jackson's message, but in the South, they listened to John Calhoun. Calhoun told them that slavery was a positive good, and that a belief in states' rights was a belief in liberty. That conflict of ideas would create the worst war in all our history. Go on to the next page for more background. You'll need it. There's much adventure, turmoil, and bloodshed ahead of you in this book. Preface 2. A Divided Nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The time was 1860, and Americans had a problem. It wasn't a new problem. They'd been living with it since the nation began. there were those words in the Declaration of Independence: all men are created equal. It had turned out that not all people were equal in the United States. One large group of people was not even free. Slavery had come to the land with the Spanish and English settlers, but they weren't the first to enslave people on the American continents. Some Native American nations had used captives as slaves. It was an evil but common practice across the world. There were jobs that no one wanted to do, and in the days before machinery, slaves seemed an answer. So if you were on the losing side of a war, or were kidnapped by a rival tribe or by a thief, you might have ended up a slave. In colonial times, there was slavery in both North and South, but slavery didn't make much sense in the North. Farms were small, and the farmer and his family could often handle the farm work themselves. After the Revolutionary War, slavery was outlawed in most northern states. The situation was different in the South. From the earliest colonial days, the crops that grew well there, tobacco, cotton, rice, and sugar, demanded large numbers of field workers. But there were few workers to be had, until a Dutch ship arrived at Jamestown in 1619 with a boatload of Africans. At first the Africans were indentured servants. Then they became slaves. It solved an economic problem for planters. Slaves made a cheap, easy source of labor. After the Revolutionary War, slave laws grew harsher and harsher in the South. Slavery raised issues besides economics. One was racism. In the United States, the slaves were all people of color, either Indians or blacks. And there was the issue of right and wrong. Some Northerners, and some Southerners, thought slavery morally wrong. Yet few of them were willing to do anything about it. The Southerners who opposed slavery did not speak up loudly, and as long as slavery stayed in the South, most Northerners were happy to forget about it. But there were Western lands coming into the country, and that was where problems developed. Southerners wanted slavery to expand. They wanted the new territories in the West to be slave territories. Northerners didn't. Remember, most of the white people who didn't like slavery kept quiet. They didn't do anything about it. Was that wrong? Why didn't they?
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.